Good afternoon. A few more people taking their seats here. As some of you have been made aware, my name is Ted Sawyer. Hello. It's my pleasure to introduce the next speaker, Stacy Lynn Smith. Stacy Lynn Smith earned her Bachelor of Fine Arts from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago in 2006 and started working as a sales representative at the Bullseye Resource Center in Portland about a year later. Working at Bullseye gave her an opportunity to explore glass, a material that she had been told to pay attention to by her professor, James Ude, a prominent art critic in Chicago. Sooner than later, Smith was making compelling work with the material. And then, shortly thereafter, exhibiting at Bullseye Gallery, and eventually began lecturing and teaching as part of Bullseye's education program, even though, technically, she was working in the sales department still. In 2011, she joined me, Nathan Sandberg, and Sylvia Levinson in New Mexico to give continuous demonstrations over the course of 3 days at Art Santa Fe. Her energy and passion were infectious, and I found, much to my delight, that her presence even improved my attitude. I knew that I wanted her on the research and education team, but did she want that? Happily, the answer was yes, and she became part of the R&E team at the beginning of this year. Please join me in welcoming Stacy Lynn Smith.
All right. Oh, it is on. That was fantastic. Can everybody hear me? It's echoing a little bit. So I was really nervous all day, but I went outside for the last 5 minutes and was doing power poses. So you make yourself really big. Everybody do it just for a second. Oh! You make yourself really big for 2 to 5 minutes, and it raises your testosterone. And it lowers your stress hormones. So it's really good to do before a talk. And also, I hope you love my presentation. If you do, you'll be ready for drinking at the happy hour. And if you don't, booze is close at hand. So either way, you'll be doing good. All right, so I'm gonna talk to you about me, about my journey with glass, and some thoughts I want you to leave with. I was, unsurprisingly, a very strange child. So I loved dinosaurs, and I wanted to be a paleontologist with all my heart. I also loved collecting everything and anything, from grocery lists that I would find scattered around at department stores to fruit stickers. I had an entire wall of my room dedicated to fruit stickers and another wall dedicated to sugar packets. And my parents, who are here in the audience, raise your hands. Mom and Dad! Were amazingly supportive in those efforts. They just kind of closed the door and didn't go in, and it worked out for both of us. So at that same time, I loved fine art. And my parents enrolled me in painting and drawing lessons when I was young. This is an oil painting I did when I was 8. And I was also interested in classical flute playing, so I was in the, I skipped a few years in band and was in band for a really long time as well. As I got older and started venturing into the dangerous land of Portland, because I lived in Vancouver, Washington, by the way, I didn't say that, I noticed these amazing impregnated telephone poles full of posters. And there were these kids with weird colored hair and tattoos kissing, and it was so full of life and energy and had something that I desperately needed to have. So I started looking into punk rock ideology in music and getting really interested in the idea of DIY, or do it yourself. So instead of waiting for someone else to publish you, for instance, you make your own magazine, you photocopy it, whatever you need to do, and you get it out into the world. Same thing with jackets. Make your own stencil, print it yourself, and maybe you'll get paid with a 40 or something, was the idea. So I was involved in this. At the same time, I was still practicing classical flute and oil painting. And then I graduated from high school. I actually tested out 2 years early and started going to community college. From there, I moved to Chicago. The first time I visited Chicago, I was about 15, and I just knew it was the city I needed to be in for my art education. What was wonderful about the school, one of the things, was that the studio was actually connected to the museum. The museum started out as the school's collection. It got so big that they had to turn what was the school into the museum. And so I was able to walk back and forth from the studio to the exhibitions. And I remember when I was 15, going to Chicago and seeing this piece by Rembrandt. It was from, I'm gonna get all weepy, the later part of his life, where he had lost everything. His family was gone, his patrons were gone, and you can see it in the painting. You can see it when he painted every crevice, every line. And I remember weeping in front of the piece. Finding myself back in Chicago, I found new work that brought the same kind of intensity to me emotionally. And the first piece that really did that was this work by Felix Gonzalez Torres. He was a Cuban-born American artist and also a gay man. And this piece really struck me. It's called A Portrait of Ross, and it was comprised of 175 pounds of individually wrapped candies. The audience was allowed to eat from the pile. So Ross was his longtime lover, who died that same year in '91 from AIDS. So the piece itself represented that diminishing of his body, and yet this kind of rebirth, because it was always to be replenished as it was in the gallery. Other works by him that inspired me were his Monument Untitled series, where he had stacks and stacks of lithographs that the audience was allowed to take with them. So art as gift became really important. However, at the time, I was still oil painting, going to Portland, gathering material from the telephone poles, making collages, and then painting from those collages. So things were starting to not work so well for me in the studio. I also spent a lot of time at the Field Museum because they had dinosaur bones and meteorites and really cool things, which led me to wanting to understand museology, or the study of how museums present things in order to make them important, which led me to the work of Mark Dion. This piece was called the Tate Thames Dig. So he got a group of archeologists to the Thames River and collected all the materials they could find along the beaches, and then put them into this Wunderkammer, or wonder cabinet. And what I love about his work is that he would put, a Coca-Cola bottle right next to something that could be ancient. So he kind of flipped science on its head, saying, why do we make one thing important and not another? So at this time, I was really struggling with myself, and I knew something needed to change. So I started to think, what is it that really interests me? And it kept going back to those darn posters. Everything kept going back to them. And I decided to start looking into printmaking and understanding why that fascinated me so much. So I started studying the history, which included understanding how printmaking spread across the world. So Gutenberg in the 15th century created a printing press that would allow books and novels to be printed in multitudes quickly and relatively cheaply. Before this, it was really the aristocracy that had access to that information. And there's an amazing Canadian philosopher named Marshall McLuhan, who in the 60s wrote a book about this called The Gutenberg Galaxy. The concept is that everything, our whole society and how we understood the information and how it disseminates changed because of this invention, which is pretty amazing. So for me, printmaking has this rebellion to it, this stand up, I'm going to keep making stuff whether you like it or not, and I can make thousands and spread it everywhere, which really interested me. I love that picture. So I stopped painting altogether, which was all I had ever really known. To my parents' dismay, I think, a little bit at the beginning. And I started studying printmaking, so offset lithography, which was really cool, etching, and definitely screen printing. And screen printing was the thing that stuck the most, because I could do it anywhere. I lived in a one-bedroom apartment on the second floor, and I could still screen print. I could pressure wash in the bathroom. I could, you could do it anywhere, basically. And that really was important to me in terms of the nature of printmaking. So my first main project I did in printmaking was this one, which I never even titled it, but I produced hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of the same print, an edition, all by hand. And I put the prints all over Chicago, and then took photos of where I took them, and then went back a week later to see what had happened, and then went back about a month later. So the lifespan of an average Chicago poster was about a week. That's all you got. That's it. So I completed this project, and I was kind of dumbfounded. I didn't know where to go. I had learned everything I needed to know from that project. I didn't feel like it had legs to go further. At the end of my years in Chicago, I made this piece, and it's not my favorite piece, but it changed the way I looked at what I was allowed to do as an artist. So instead of trying to represent the poster, I just let the poster be the poster. I collected them and then put them into a cabinet or a picture frame that the audience could look through, which really changed my perspective. In that sense, I feel, as artists, many of us go through kind of art history in our personal work in a lot of ways. Especially I feel that way about my work. So, in the 15th century, it was about technique, and there was a very strong kind of sense of what painting is supposed to be and what art is meant to be. We start looking at the 19th century and the introduction of synthetic colorants and a livelier, more expressionist kind of feel to painting and to artwork, which you can also see in the prints of the time, like this work by Toulouse-Lautrec. Colors being used in different ways than were before, and styles being different than what they were before. In the 60s, color really kind of changed, because instead of making products all kind of a dull gray, they started deciding to color them. And what became of that was the color chart, which really made every color equal. Not one color was better than the other. It was all personal preference, and they were organized, determined by whoever put it together. And you can see that kind of attitude start emerging in contemporary work, such as this piece by Rauschenberg. And he was actually a student of Albers, which we heard about yesterday. But what he said was that of all the tricks and amazing magical things you can do with color, I've learned those, and yet I still don't know why one would be more important to use than another, which is an interesting kind of statement. That ideology moves through art history in terms of color with works such as Gerhard Richter's 10 large color panels, where he's really taking that idea of the color chart to the extreme. At the same time in sculpture, the idea of found objects and found color, this is even earlier actually, this is like 1911. You all probably know this, Marcel Duchamp's fountain, which is just a urinal with his signature on it. And in his idea, an art piece is an art piece because the audience believes it is. And that's the main goal of an art piece. And that kind of ideology is also persisted throughout contemporary work, such as Jeff Koons' Lobster des Chateaux Versailles, where he just took a blow-up lobster and put it in the chateau amongst these paintings that in the public eye, that's art. And he's really good at kind of saying, screw you. And I don't love all of his work, but it's a good example. Other artists deal with color more in terms of the technological side. So Angela Bullock here, with her pixel cubes, is talking more about how color is now accessible by the click of a button. And she's taking those immediate colors and enlarging them and making us kind of be aware of that color space that we're so used to on a screen of a computer. So in that sense, I went through art history. So I thought I had to be a painter. And I thought because I was good at drawing and painting that that's what I was meant to do. But it was so frustrating because I started learning of all the other things I can do. And that was a lot more interesting to me. Glass. I never thought I'd be working in glass. It was not even really on my horizon, except for because of this guy, which is James Yud. And he was my contemporary art history teacher in Chicago. And he said to us in one lecture that we should stand up and take notice of what's happening in contemporary glass, because there are relevant, poignant, and important things happening, and we're not paying attention, and we should be. And he showed the work of Catherine Newell, who I know is in the audience somewhere, and talked about Bullseye. Of course, I was from Portland, but I'd never heard of the place before. So when I moved back, I needed a job, obviously, and they were hiring at the retail department. And I was like, well, I've sold things before, I can do this. So I took the job on, not knowing that I would be standing in front of 300 people talking a few years later. And that job taught me a lot. I kind of was the front line. Somebody would walk in with a broken plate and want me to know the answer. So I got to learn a lot about the technical side of glass. And I got to know a lot of amazing people in the community. And I'm very grateful to all of you that I know in the audience, because you've truly changed my life in a lot of ways. I also got to memorize all of the Bullseye color styles, which I was really good at, because I'm really good at taking tests. So I got 100% on all of the tests. That was really fun. I also got introduced to a number of incredible artists, such as Jeffrey Sarmiento, who's a screen printer and prints on glass and really utilizes Bullseye's bright colors. He's fearless in my eyes and pretty incredible. Oh, here's a detail of that, by the way. Pretty neat. On the other side of things, I was enamored with the work of Carrie Iverson. Her pieces were quiet, and they took time to really get into, and they fascinated me. And they were quite the opposite of what I tend to do, but they were just gorgeous. So when I came to Bullseye, I remember chromophobia. You guys all remember that from yesterday? I certainly had a case of this. Completely overwhelmed by the color, and really afraid that any subtle gesture that I meant to show the audience would be completely lost by them just oogling the material itself. So my first works in glass were very monochromatic, black and white. And I feel that sometimes that's appropriate, Sometimes a piece is supposed to be stoic in order to let other things through. But it depends on the circumstance. This piece was the first piece I really believe I made in glass. I made a plate in a first glass fusing class, was actually the first thing I made. So this is kind of the second one. And I kind of stumbled upon being able to print powdered glasses through a screen, because I had it in my car, and I brought it into Open Studio, and it worked. So these are screen-printed little tiles, and they're arranged in these metal boxes that I dug out of a dumpster by city liquidators here in Portland. And I wanted to arrange them kind of like the glass at the factory. So, and then I wanted people to be able to pull them out and look at them. And I couldn't figure out a solution until I was looking at my grandma's jewelry box and her rings. And so I fitted the interior with this kind of foam, and so people could pull out the objects. This was called collection. And it led to a number of pieces that were very similar. And I remember Michael Endo, who's somewhere in here, said something about one of my pieces from this collection, that it reminded him of bronzed baby shoes, which really struck a chord, because at one point I was painting the posters, so why would I be reproducing them again? However, this material transformed the material. The posters are ephemeral. They're meant to be disintegrated and just thrown away. And glass has this kind of idea of longevity. So I wanted that it was that play between the two worlds that I was interested in. I kept making a lot of monochromatic pieces in wall pieces as well. This is intersect, and what I was trying to do was take all this disparate information that I would gather from the streets and scan them in computers and somehow get all of that to talk and make conversations. Kind of how the telephone pole itself was a hub of communication for kids like me, and hopefully a lot of you too. And yet another black and white piece. You see a theme here, right? So my method that I use in the studio allows me to utilize any of the Bullseye colors, and there's a lot of them. So when I was asked to give this speech, I started thinking about why my pieces were so monochromatic. In the past, all of my work with found materials, the actual physical ephemera, was always bright in different ways. This is Tokyo Dialogue. It's a series of 13. And my colleague brought material from Tokyo, and I looked through them, and I tried to make connections. And a lot of times, it was based in color. No fear of it at all. More recent collages, again, color. I think what it comes down to is permission. When I'm working with found materials, I'm not completely responsible. Somebody already went to Kinko's, somebody already picked out that lime green paper in order to make a statement. So I'm kind of relieved of that a little bit, and I'm free to do whatever I want with what I find, which was offsetting to know that this is a part of my psyche, that somehow I'm not allowing myself to explore this color in a different way. For example, I think this is 2008, I took a core sample of the telephone pole at 39th and Hawthorne here in Portland, and I dissected all the layers that was in that telephone pole onto microscope slides. So I had no control over the color, but it was still really interesting. The exterior was so bright and vivid, but they were synthetic colors that leached out really easily. So as you went into the interior, it started to become more green and brown and more natural. It also stunk really bad because it molds in the interior, which is why they don't want you to put posters up. It destroys the telephone poles. And it's dangerous for the workers, but it's a cultural phenomenon, come on. In the same sense, I think about this piece, which was Accumulate from 2010, I believe, my first solo exhibition. I collected over 5,000 posters from the Portland area. So I had a humongous Excel spreadsheet of every venue, every performance hall. And I folded all those posters into little palm-sized tiles and then organized them by color. So I had the color, I had to work with what I had, and then my only control was the design of the space. So it ended up being 65 feet long and about 5.5 feet tall, just rows of color. And here's the kind of close-up of those little squares there. So for me, thinking about color and glass is this huge epic battle in my mind. How can I let it in? Can I let it in and be that? Can I be that? Should I not? Should I stay stoic? And this year, or just this last year, I was invited to the End and After, which was a split show with the amazing Michael Endo. And I made this piece called Capsule. And I feel it really shows a lot of those emotional tensions I'm having between the two. The exterior is an antique cabinet with this austere glass front. And the glass front is based on my Outlook calendar for work. However, in the interior is this party kind of going on. And that's my relationship with the materials as they are right now. However, this was a challenge that I was ready to face, and I'm still ready to face. So I wanted to start introducing color into my palette. And I thought, where should I start? The primaries. So yellow, red, and blue. I'm going to start there. And I made this series called Fragment. So this is Fragment Blue, and all these posters were from the late 70s, early 80s Austin punk rock scene. And then Fragment Red, which is all more Portland-based posters. And lastly, Fragment Yellow. So I really enjoyed making these works, and I feel like I'm becoming more comfortable with it, because it's taking some of that life that those posters have of being fearless and putting it into the material that is expensive and is dangerous in my mind to a certain extent. My next goal, this is a wonderful piece by Andy Smith, who's a designer and artist, is to use CMYK colors. So I've done the primaries. It's time for CMYK. The problem I'm having, so CMYK is very important to printmakers. And if you look here, you know on like your cereal boxes, they have those stripes? That's what this is. And basically it's telling the person who's looking at the printer if all the colors are at the right levels. So if your yellow's too strong, or your magenta's too strong, or your black's too strong, or your cyan is too low, something like that. If we look here at these kind of various colors, they're actually made up of those CMYK. I love this. I want to do a lot of work in this. However, I am having the hardest time, guys, making this happen. I've done a lot of tests. I'm really trying. And if you feel as I do, and you're willing to pay a certain amount, like I am, please email sales@bullseyeglass.com. I actually had no idea they were going to talk about magenta earlier, so this is kind of uncomfortable in a good way. All right, so let's get serious and talk about Facebook. This is a map of all the connections that Facebook alone has created in that social media, which I love and I've taken full advantage of with my print and glass group, which all of you can join if you'd like to. I'll just add you. It's a group. But with glass being such a stable material, and it seems like that sort of thing where, we advertise that it doesn't leach out color over time. How do we make that relevant in a world where everything is, what's the word for it? Not artificial. Virtual. There we go. Virtual, where ones and zeros are creating flashes of images constantly around us. I don't really have the answer for you on that. But it's happening right now. We are still making relevant work. I 100% believe in what Mr. Yud said, and I'm highly impressed with everything that I see being made in glass right now. For me, oh, well, here's an example of the digital world where you can choose any color you want at a click of a button. And we were discussing how to get more colors out of the glass when this is happening at the same time. So there's a dualism there on some level. My answer to this kind of a question personally is to utilize those kind of connotations toward glass in a different way. So this was a piece I made in 2009, I believe, called Selection. And it was 8 feet by 4 feet. The glass is actually the things that are sticking out towards you. Those are little glass wafers that I screen printed. And the audience was allowed to break the wafers. So it went from this stable grid, this very pure grid, to being disintegrated. And I got the idea from looking at those tearaway numbers on telephone poles, you know, like babysitter numbers. But also because people are afraid of breaking glass. There's a fear involved in that I really wanted to use. The piece that's currently at the gallery utilizes kind of the same process. So they asked me to make a piece all in white. And so I thought, okay, well, I'll make a piece in white, but then I'll let everybody smear crap all over it. It's actually graphite. So utilizing the fear of breaking, utilizing the idea that you're not allowed to touch things in a gallery, and utilizing the idea that you're in a social environment where looks are important, and let's get you dirty. Let's break that down a little bit. There's a detail before I cleaned it. Recently, in the end and after, I did another kind of breaking installation where I screen printed over 500 little sound waves on glass, and then I drilled holes in every single one. That took a lot of time. And then I installed it at the Bullseye Gallery, which I'm sure they loved. So I had ADX here in Portland fabricate these little boxes, and the glass slid into the box, and a pin held it in place. Underneath, there was this kind of boundary area and microphones set up. So the audience was allowed to pull a pin, and the glass would fall and shatter. The microphones would pick up the sound and play it back into the space. So people who were giggling out of fear, those giggles would play back into the space. And it was an amazing experience for me, especially opening night, because there were a ton of people. It was so cool. So people would be breaking, and then people coming into the gallery didn't know that it was okay. So you get these shock, like the sounds of shock coming, and then giggling, and then people looking back and forth, and confusion, and it was so great. I really enjoyed it. So here's a little video of that. This is after the opening. We get sound, yeah. Robert Burns was the sound engineer I worked with on this. He was incredible. Spooky. The poor gallery staff had to listen to this for months. Not a good sound to have in the gallery, in the glass gallery anyway. It is for me though. The next one I want to do is from like 2 stories up. So the glass falls really far. We're going to make that happen. Okay, so I want to leave you with the idea that it's okay to be afraid. And it's okay to strike out on your own and even go against yourself sometimes into unknown territory. This is a piece by Eddie Cola, who's a Oakland street artist. If you want to achieve greatness, stop asking for permission. And I need to know this too sometimes, and I have a long way to go in my career, so we'll see what happens. But if you take anything from this lecture, I just want you to know that you have the strength to find that, to fight, even if it's fighting yourself, if it's fighting your parents, which I don't have to anymore. I love you, Mom and Dad. You can do this. So thank you. That's it. The curtsy. Power! Power move! Let's go get some beer! Woo!
Is this alive? All right, here's a question.
I'm not alive. Oh, I am.
Hello? Okay. Why is glass dangerous?
Oh, why is glass dangerous? That's a really good question. For me, it's a combination of things. One, it has a very strong culture, and I'm not always sure that I fit, so it's scary on that level. It's scary because it's really expensive. It's scary because it's technically challenging. And I think those are the 3 reasons why I love it so much. Well, some of the reasons why I love it so much, but yeah, it's dangerous on that level to me.